that many of these are simply the incomplete obligations of the past. The American people deserve to be impatient because we do not yet have the public house in order. We've had great success in restoring our economic integrity, and we've rescued our nation from the worst economic mess since the Depression. But there's more to do. For starters, the federal deficit is outrageous. For years, I've asked that we stop pushing onto our children the excesses of our government. What the Congress finally needs to do is pass a constitutional amendment that mandates a balanced budget. And forces government to live within its means. States, cities, and the families of America balance their budgets. Why can't we? Next, the budget process is a sorry spectacle. The missing of deadlines and the nightmare of monstrous continuing resolutions packing hundreds of billions of dollars of spending into one bill must be stopped. And we ask the Congress once again, give us the same tool that 43 governors have, a line item veto, so we can carve out the boondoggles and those items that would never survive on their own. I will send the Congress broad recommendations on the budget, but first I'd like to see yours. Let's go to work and get this done together. But now, let's talk about this year's budget. Even though I have submitted it within the Graham-Rudman-Hollings deficit reduction target, I have seen suggestions that we might postpone that timetable. Well, I think the American people are tired of hearing the same old excuses. Together, we made a commitment to balance the budget. Now, let's keep it. As for those suggestions that the answer is higher taxes, the American people have repeatedly rejected that shop-worn advice. They know that we don't have deficits because people are taxed too little. We have deficits because big government spends too much. Now, next month, I'll place 2 additional reforms before the Congress. We've created a welfare monster that is a shocking indictment of our sense of priorities. Our national welfare system consists of some 59 major programs and over 6,000 pages of federal laws and regulations on which more than $132 billion was spent in 1985. I will propose a new national welfare strategy, a program of welfare reform through state-sponsored, community-based demonstration projects. This is the time to reform this outmoded social dinosaur and finally break the poverty trap. Now, we will never abandon those who, through no fault of their own, must have our help. But let us work to see how many can be freed from the dependency of welfare and made self-supporting, which the great majority of welfare recipients want more than anything else. Next, let us remove a financial specter facing our older Americans. The fear of an illness so expensive that it can result in having to make an intolerable choice between bankruptcy and death. I will submit legislation shortly to help free the elderly from the fear of catastrophic illness. Now let's turn to the future. It's widely said that America is losing her competitive edge. Well, that won't happen if we act now. How well prepared are we to enter the 21st century? In my lifetime, America set the standard for the world. It is now time to determine that we should enter the next century having achieved a level of excellence unsurpassed in history. We will achieve this first by guaranteeing that government does everything possible to promote America's ability to compete. Second, we must act as individuals in a quest for excellence that will not be measured by new proposals or billions in new funding. Rather, it involves an expenditure of American spirit and just plain American grit. The Congress will soon receive my comprehensive proposals to enhance our competitiveness, including new science and technology centers and strong new funding for basic research. The bill will include legal and regulatory reforms and weapons to fight unfair trade practices. Competitiveness also means giving our farmers a shot at participating fairly and fully in a changing world market. Preparing for the future must begin, as always, with our children. We need to set for them new and more rigorous goals. We must demand more of ourselves and our children by raising literacy levels dramatically by the year 2000. Our children should master the basic concepts of math and science. And let's insist that students not leave high school until they have studied and understood the basic documents of our national heritage. There's one more thing we can't let up on. Let's redouble our personal efforts to provide for every child a safe and drug-free learning environment. If our crusade against drugs succeeds with our children, we will defeat that scourge all over the country. Finally, let's stop suppressing the spiritual core of our national being. Our nation could not have been conceived without divine help. Why is it that we can build a nation with our prayers, but we can't use a schoolroom for voluntary prayer? The 100th Congress of the United States should be remembered as the one that ended the expulsion of God from America's classrooms. The quest for excellence into the 21st century begins in the schoolroom, but must go next to the workplace. More than 20 million new jobs will be created before the new century unfolds. And by then, our economy should be able to provide a job for everyone who wants to work. We must also enable our workers to adapt to the rapidly changing nature of the workplace. And I will propose substantial new federal commitments keyed to retraining and job mobility. Over the next few weeks, I'll be sending the Congress a complete series of these special messages on budget reform, welfare reform, competitiveness, including education, trade, worker training and assistance, agriculture, and other subjects. The Congress can give us these tools, but to make these tools work, it really comes down to just being our best, And that's the core of American greatness. The responsibility of freedom presses us toward higher knowledge, and I believe moral and spiritual greatness. Through lower taxes and smaller government, government has its ways of freeing people's spirits, but only we, each of us, can let the spirits soar against our own individual standards. Excellence is what makes freedom ring, and isn't that what we do best? We're entering our third century now, but it's wrong to judge our nation by its years. The calendar can't measure America because we were meant to be an endless experiment in freedom with no limit to our reaches, no boundaries to what we can do, no end point to our hopes. The United States Constitution is the impassioned and inspired vehicle by which we travel through history. It grew out of the most fundamental inspiration of our existence, that we are here to serve Him by living free, that living free releases in us the noblest of impulses and the best of our abilities, that we would use these gifts for good and generous purposes and would secure them not just for ourselves and for our children, but for all mankind. Over the years, and I won't count if you don't, nothing has been so heartwarming to me as speaking to America's young, and the little ones especially, so fresh-faced and so eager to know. Well, from time to time, I've been with them, they will ask about our Constitution. And I hope you members of Congress will not deem this a breach of protocol if you will permit me to share these thoughts again with the young people who might be listening or watching this evening. I've read the constitutions of a number of countries, including the Soviet Unions. Now, some people are surprised to hear that they have a constitution, and it even supposedly grants a number of freedoms to its people. Many countries have written into their constitution provisions for freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. But if this is true, why is the Constitution of the United States so exceptional? Well, the difference is so small that it almost escapes you. But it's so great, it tells you the whole story in just 3 words. We, the people. In those other constitutions, the government tells the people of those countries what they're allowed to do. In our Constitution, we, the people, tell the government what it can do, and it can do only those things listed in that document and no others. Virtually every other revolution in history has just exchanged one set of rulers for another set of rulers. Our revolution is the first to say the people are the masters and government is their servant. And you young people out there, don't ever forget that. Someday you could be in this room, but wherever you are, America is depending on you to reach your highest and be your best, because here in America, we the people are in charge. Just 3 words, some words. We the people. Those are the kids on Christmas Day looking out from a frozen sentry post on the 38th parallel in Korea, or aboard an aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, a million miles from home, but doing their duty. We the people, those are the warm-hearted whose numbers we can't begin to count, who will begin the day with a little prayer for the hostages they will never know and MIA families they will never meet. Why? Because that's the way we are, this unique breed we call Americans. We the people. They're farmers on tough times, but who never stop feeding a hungry world. They're the volunteers at the hospital choking back their tears for the 100th time, caring for a baby struggling for life because of a mother who used drugs. And you'll forgive me a special memory. It's a million mothers like Nellie Reagan who never knew a stranger or turned a hungry person away from her kitchen door. We the people. They refute last week's television commentary, downgrading our optimism and our idealism. They are the entrepreneurs, the builders, the pioneers, and a lot of regular folks, the true heroes of our land who make up the most uncommon nation of doers in history. You know they're Americans because their spirit is as big as the universe, and their hearts are bigger than their spirits. We the people, starting the third century of a dream and standing up to some cynic who's trying to tell us we're not going to get any better. Are we at the end? Well, I can't tell it any better than the real thing. A story recorded by James Madison from the final moments of the Constitutional Convention, September 17th, 1787. As the last few members signed the document, Benjamin Franklin, the oldest delegate at 81 years and in frail health, looked over toward the chair where George Washington daily presided. At the back of that chair was painted the picture of a sun on the horizon. And turning to those sitting next to him, Franklin observed that artists found it difficult in their painting to distinguish between a rising and a setting sun. Well, I know if we were there, we could see those delegates sitting around Franklin, leaning in to listen more closely to him. And then Dr. Franklin began to share his deepest hopes and fears about the outcome of their efforts. And this is what he said. I have often looked at that picture behind the president without being able to tell whether it was a rising or setting sun. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. Well, you can bet it's rising, because my fellow citizens, America isn't finished. Her best days have just begun. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
President Ronald Reagan finishing his State of the Union address, receiving, as is traditional, a standing applause, standing ovation, a particularly long and sustained ovation as the president entered the hall. You may have noticed that about 3/4 of the way through the address, the president seemed to have a little bit of difficulty with his voice. Other than that, it was, whatever one may think of the substance of the address, it was a strong performance, a well-delivered address, with the notation that he did have some difficulty with his voice about 3/4 of the way through. For those of you who may have joined us just a bit late, or perhaps if you were distracted as the president makes his way out of the room, we'll quickly review some of the points in the State of the Union address. On Iran, the president said that he accepted the responsibility, but he did not say that he accepted blame, nor did he apologize in any way. His comments about the weapons for the government of the Ayatollah Khomeini lasted roughly 2.5 to 3 minutes of the about 35-minute address to the nation. The president repeated what he has said before, is that he will not yield to terrorist blackmail. That's a quote. He did not go on to try to specifically refute those who say that's exactly what he did when he arranged for the arms to go to Iran. The president moved quickly on, underscored his support for the Strategic Defense Initiative, otherwise known as Star Wars. He said he was determined to go ahead with that. He once again sounded a very strong backing for the Nicaraguan Contra rebels. He said, and this is a quote, "No Soviet beachhead in Central America," unquote. About trade, he said he would not allow America to be a, quote, trade patsy, unquote. He called the huge and growing federal budget deficit outrageous and called again, as he has before, for a constitutional amendment that would mandate a balanced budget. That, of course, would not take effect until after President Reagan left office. He came out for national welfare reform, saying the welfare system as it now exists is a dinosaur. He backs what has already been introduced in Congress catastrophic illness protection for older Americans. There's been some confusion about that at the White House, about exactly what the president will and will not back on that. But the president said, at least as a general principle, he backs it. He talked about increasing American competitiveness in the world. Again, said he was in favor of a constitutional amendment that would ensure school prayers. Talked about prayer being the spiritual core of our national being. And in perhaps the most memorable line of this State of the Union address, President Reagan said, quote, "Excellence is what makes freedom ring." Now, standing by at the White House is our veteran CBS News White House correspondent, Bill Plant. Bill, you've covered Ronald Reagan for many years, over most of the miles he's made. What was different, if anything, about this address?
This was one that he had to perform well on, Dan, and the first priority among the people who advised the president and wrote that speech was that he looked good. And I think there's probably general agreement that Mr. Reagan did look good. Remember, he hasn't been seen much in the last several months. The Iran affair and now his recuperation from surgery. So the key here was to make him look strong, come out strong, look rested. He did that, and they can then go from there.
Bill, were you impressed by anything that was left out of this address? Anything not addressed, so to speak?
Dan, the key items were all in the speech. We'd been told that they were. But the one thing that could have been in this speech, the most glaring omission, I think, was any kind of apology or sense that he made a mistake in Iran.
By my watch, the president spent about 2.5 to 3 minutes talking about the Iran situation. Did that surprise you that he spent that little time?
Not at all. The feeling here was that the most important thing for him to do was to address it. That if he simply mentioned it, he was 90% of the way home. The White House thinks that public attention to this is dropping off.
Anything, Bill, that you think would give him difficulty in this address? Anything stick in your mind that you said to yourself, that's going to cause him trouble with the Congress or anywhere else?
The legislative agenda which he's laid out is going to be very difficult for him to get, and we'll be talking about that more later in this broadcast, I know. But there is a wish list there that is not matched at all by what it would cost either.
Bill, the Democrats are going to hit hard, no doubt, and we will hear the Democratic response very shortly, on deeds, not words. They're going to hammer away at him that, fine, he delivers a very nice speech. It's very nice to talk about hammering down on drugs, very nice to talk about increasing our attention to education, but that some of those things cost money and that Ronald Reagan's not prepared to spend it. He'll talk about it, but his deeds won't match his words.